In this video, we're going to create a drawing of a cupcake using pastels and pastel pencils on PastelMat paper, and we're going to do this in one sitting in real time. Hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video we're going to try a new content format here, and you guys please let me know what you think. I'm thinking of a name for this type of content. I think I'm going to call it Art Alongs, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a drawing or a painting in the future in one sitting, and I'm going to take you through the entire process step by step. So these drawings / paintings are going to be completed in hopefully under 2 hours, and you can follow along with me mark by mark. I know a lot of you guys are enjoying getting sketchy, and while we're out of season with getting sketchy, I feel like this is a nice substitute. Not quite as in-depth as the live lessons that we do as part of the membership program, but again, creating a drawing or painting in one sitting, of course, is absolutely satisfying. So I hope you enjoy this. Now, if you do enjoy this, please make sure that you like the video. If I get a lot of likes on the video, I'll know that this is content that you like, of course. And if you add your comments below this video and tell me if you like this type of content, of course, this is a longer form of content, you can let me know that as well in the comments below. Now, of course, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't done so yet, I would encourage you to subscribe and click on the notification bell so you're notified when new videos like this are uploaded. And if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to another level, we have an incredible membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. And when I say incredible, I'm talking about incredible. Our membership program includes a variety of drawing and painting courses on a variety of drawing and painting subject matter and media, weekly live lessons, which take you through the process of creating a piece of art from start to finish. These are done in series, and they are complete pieces of art. Of course, all of the recorded live lessons are included in the membership program as well. Weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. All of that is included in the membership program, and there is tons and tons of great educational content there waiting for you. If you want to check out the membership program, I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can go check it out. You can start your free trial, of course. If you want to just check out 3 of the course videos and ebooks for free, I'll leave a link for that as well in the description below this video. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this first art along. Now let's talk about the materials we're going to be using for this lesson. Now I'm going to link all of the materials that I'm using in the description below this video, so if you want to go purchase your own, you can definitely do so. All right, for this lesson, I'm going to be working on PastelMat paper, and I'm using what I think is the buttercup color of paper. Now this paper is really interesting. It has a kind of a fine grit sandpaper feel associated with it. So even though it feels smooth to the touch, it actually has quite a bit of tooth, which of course is going to be important for our layering of the pastels and the pastel pencils that are going to follow. Now I've already taped out this area. Now this area measures 8 inches by 7 inches. So it's 8 inches tall by 7 inches across. And you can see here that when I place my hand over the area, it's not that large, but it's also not that small. This will allow us enough space to develop details, but also a smaller space so that we can finish this drawing in one sitting. Now, as I've already mentioned before, I'm going to be using a variety of different forms of pastel to create this drawing. I'll be using Rembrandt soft pastels, of course, and I'll also be using Carbothello pastel pencils, and also Conte a Paris pastel pencils. Now the difference in these different mediums is pretty straightforward. The pastels, of course, are traditional stick soft pastels. The Carbothello pencils are actually a little bit harder, so I like to use those for details. And the Conte a Paris pencils are pretty soft. They're more akin to the soft pastels. Of course, that means that we're going to need to sharpen those a little bit more often, but they're nice and soft, so they're going to be a little bit easier for the larger sections. Now you can sketch your drawing out, or basically the contour line drawing, with any medium that you wish. I prefer to stick with a pastel pencil though, and I want a pencil that's going to be dark enough for me to see it, but it's not going to be so dark that it kind of overpowers the image. So I'm going to start here with this light gray, and that should give us enough contrast to see the lines that we create, but also this pencil shouldn't be strong enough to make lines that we can't cover with subsequent pastel applications. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'm just going to start by figuring out where my cupcake exists within the picture plane. So I'm going to basically first compare the edge of the picture plane with where that cherry starts, and then I'm going to make a little mark. So that's going to give me an idea where the top of the cherry is going to exist. Now I'm going to look at the side of the picture plane and compare it with the side of the cupcake, and I'm going to come in a little bit. I'm just looking at the negative space that exists there, and make a little mark for the edge of the cupcake on that side. I'm going to do the same thing on the right side. Again, it looks like cupcake might come in a little bit further on the right side compared to the left side. And then I'm also going to find the bottom of the cupcake. Now, these are obviously estimations, but I'm trying to make these estimations as accurate as possible, but they don't have to be perfect, of course. Now I'm going to start using this information to figure out where the cupcake, the overall bulk of the cupcake, exists on the paper. So I'm not thinking about the cherry at all. And you might notice that I'm holding the pencil really low down on the shaft. This is going to give me a light mark on the surface, and I'm not going to put too much material on the surface, in other words. So I just want a real light mark here as I'm trying to find where the cupcake exists. Now, these lines, of course, are pretty general. I'm looking at the overall shape of the cupcake at this point, and in just a minute, I'll go in and refine this shape. Now, one thing that you might notice is there's a little bit of perspective going on here, a little bit of a three-point perspective, actually. So the bottom of the cupcake gets quite a bit skinnier as it goes down. So that's something that we'll need to include in the drawing. And you can exaggerate this, of course. It doesn't have to be exactly like the reference. You can exaggerate it to make it look a little bit more extreme, if you will. All right, so now we're going to figure out where the top of the cherry is located. We've got the top isolated, and we see that the body of the cherry comes down into the body of the cupcake quite a bit. So the cherry actually takes up quite a bit of the picture plane. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm using kind of some light sketchy lines here. All right, now that we've got this information in place, we can start to get a little bit more detail oriented. So now I'm going to start thinking about the actual contour lines, and I'm going to start carving those out of the overall shape that we have in place. So this is going to include the lines of the frosting, of course, and the edge of the cupcake paper. Again, by no means does this have to be perfect. You can interpret your subject any way you wish, really, and you can include as many details as you want or exclude as many details as you wish. As we look at the cupcake and start to really study it here as we're making marks, we can see that there's probably a little bit more complexity there than maybe you expected. And that's okay. Sometimes even the most simple things or at least the things that seem the most simple, end up being some of the most complex things. Now, if I see a little bit of an inconsistency in my drawing, I'm not stopping and erasing or anything like that, since we're going to be finishing this with pastel over the top. Just kind of moving my line to another place. If all of these lines get a little bit confusing to you, of course you can erase a little bit, maybe with a kneaded eraser. So it's pretty easy to get confused in all of these lines. That's okay. Just keep trying to follow along and track with your eyes and figure out where you are. Of course, we can make changes to this, where the shadows are and such, when we start developing the values here, when we start applying the pastels to the surface in earnest. So each time we, this is our initial approach to drawing this subject with the contour lines. But as we go through the process, of course, we're going to continue to study the reference. So each time we add color or make marks in any form to the surface, we're going to be still studying the subject. So we're going to see more and more as we go through the process. So this is still somewhat like a kind of a get-to-know-you sketch. We're getting to know this cupcake and some of the interesting parts of this cupcake, which there's lots of interesting parts here. All right, let's go ahead and put some indication of the little paper parts and some of the lines and creases that happen with that. Again, this can be kind of loosely defined. We don't have to copy our reference exactly. A reference is a reference. It's not necessarily something that we're trying to copy. It's something that we're getting information from. And then, of course, we, as the artist, can manifest whatever we want on the surface. If you look at the bottom of where this cupcake makes contact with the surface, it's not a nice and even line. It's a little bit bumpy. So we'll reflect that in our drawing as well. That'll add a sense of realism here. I've drawn a lot of cupcakes before. I think I've drawn this cupcake before too in the pen and ink course, Subjects with Pen and Ink. I think this was the same one that I did here, but these photographs I took of these cupcakes are just too interesting just to use them for one drawing, of course. So. All right, here we go. Now, of course, if you do want to clean up your drawing a little bit, you can. I'm going to clean up some of the edges a little bit here with a kneaded eraser. Just kind of a quick, loose erase here. And I'll go ahead and remove some of the lines on the inside of the cherry. It doesn't have to be super duper or anything. We just want to get a little bit of that material off the surface. Now you might notice I haven't drawn any of the sprinkles or anything. Of course, you can always draw those sprinkles with your contour line drawing, but in this particular case, we can add those bits of information right over the top of the pastel that we're getting ready to apply. You also might want to, if you don't have to, but our light source is we've kind of got two light sources here. We've got a light source originating from the left side, and we've got one that's kind of to the right side and behind the cupcake. This is producing an area of strongest shadow, like right in this little area right here. There's actually two cast shadows, and they overlap each other. If it's helpful to you, you can go ahead and kind of create a loose little sketch of those shadowed areas, or a little indication of where those shadowed areas are going to be, but that's not totally necessary because, of course, we can do that later in the process. All right, at this point, we're ready to start applying some of our pastels and some of our pastel pencils with a little bit more earnest, as I like to say. We're going to go ahead and start with the cherry at the top, and we're going to try to we're going to do that. We're going to start at the top and work our way down to kind of help keep our hand out of the way of the picture plane. Now, as we go through this process, you're going to notice that some of the pastel applications go outside of the edges of our contour line drawing. This is fine because we're going to go back and put a background color in here, which at this point in time, I'm thinking of a light blue instead of the white that we see in the reference. So let's go ahead and start with our base application on the cherry, get some color down, and then we'll start working some of those highlights and shadows. All right, so I've got a few colors here. Some of these are the soft pastels. We're going to start with permanent red. This might end up being too orange of a red, but we'll just at least get some color in place, and then we'll start adjusting that color. Now, you can use pastel pencils if you want for your initial application, but here I'm using the pastel just to save a little bit of time. And you can see how well that pastel matte paper just holds that pastel material in place. Really wonderful the way it does that. It gives you so much control, of course. Again, we're not going to worry about the pastel kind of going outside of the lines a little bit. That's not that big of a deal because we're going to be able to clean that up later. All right, this is kind of a little bit of a cooler red here. And we're just going to put that right over the top just to kind of cool down this the permanent red that I used before, which is, like I mentioned, a little bit orangey. You might not even be able to tell much of a difference on the feed. Now let's start adding some darker tones. This is a darker red here. In fact, the actual color is Rouge Permanent. So this is just going to allow us to start creating some of these shadowed areas. And again, I'm just kind of looking at the shapes of darker value that I see. And there's quite a bit of contrast that goes on in this cherry up here. And we can exaggerate that too in our drawing to make it a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting. We've got those wonderful highlights that happen on the top of the cherry and throughout, really. There's lots of wonderful highlights there. And this cherry actually is pretty dark overall, so we're going to make things a little bit darker in just a minute, but this is a good first start. All right, now with a pastel pencil, I'm going to go back in and just clean this up a little bit. I'm kind of basically, I don't want to use the word burnishing, but it's kind of a similar technique like what we do with colored pencils. So I'm just kind of working the pastel material around and blending it to a certain degree with the pastel pencil. And this is the Conte a Paris pastel pencil, which of course is pretty soft and allows me to work almost like I've got just a traditional stick pastel in my hand. All right, now let's get a little bit darker. I've got now one of the Carbothello pencils, and I'm going to make some of the values down here a little bit darker with the black. And black is such a strong color, so you have to kind of be careful when you use it. You don't want to overuse it. So I'm using a pretty light touch here to make some of these areas just a little bit darker. Yeah, again, it's pretty dark down towards the base of the cherry. Then at the bottom. And then again, we can go back with our red pastel pencil and work that in. It kind of gets rid of some of the graininess that's created by that last application. And it tones down the black a little bit and makes it a darker red, instead of being so black looking on the surface. Black is, like I said, a very strong color. And if you're not careful, it can make an image look flat and unnatural, so we kind of have to be careful with it. Alright, let's bring in some of our lighter values now. So I've got a white pastel pencil. I'm just going to first make some of these kind of lighter areas that aren't really highlights in here, just some lighter tones. And there's a little bit of a reflected bit of light over here. I'm not sure if that's reflected, if that's a reflected highlight, or if that is actually a highlight, but we'll go ahead and get a little bit of that in place. And again, I'm using a pretty soft touch here with this white pencil. I just want to create some variety and contrast up here. And then when we add the highlights, hopefully we'll have a cherry that looks like it's wet and has that shiny surface that we see here in the reference. Again, if it's distracting these areas that kind of go off the paper, don't let that distract you too much, because we're going to clean that up at the end. And a little bit more variety. We're going to bring in a little bit of this kind of pinkish fuchsia-ish color here. And again, just soften up some of the areas that we've already got some of the pastel material in place. We want this area to look smooth, and one of the ways that we can do that is kind of just blend some of these applications together. Alright, now for some of these highlights, I'm going to use a white pastel stick here. Instead of a pencil, you can use a pencil if you want, but this stick is going to allow me to put some bold marks down pretty easily. We might go back to a pencil here in just a second, but we'll put a few indications of some highlight here. Let's see if we can get a little bit more control with the pencil. So you can see how that doesn't, the pencil, which you would think would give you a really strong, bold mark, doesn't really always work out that way. Sometimes the pencil just kind of mixes with the colors in place. It's okay, we'll use this to just get a little bit more variety, and then we'll come back and make those highlights a little bit stronger. And you know, you could spend hours and hours in one area in a drawing, and since I'm trying to finish this drawing in one sitting, we can't spend hours and hours on this cherry. even though I'd be okay with that. All right, back with the pastel stick. All right, now let's move on to the body, or actually the frosting of the cupcake here. We're going to work our way down. We can do more work to the cherry, and we might do that. We might come back and do a little bit more work to the cherry, but I feel like we need to have some contrasting colors in place. So let's go ahead and get started on that lower part. Now, you might look at the frosting and say, hey, that's white, but there's actually a variety of different colors in there. So we're going to be using some yellows, some creams, some light grays, and of course some whites as well as we work our way down. So let's go ahead and get into that part. So I'm going to start initially here with this kind of creamy off-white color here. And again, it may look a little bit like it's white, but it's really not. It's really kind of a creamy color. And this is going to give us a little bit of contrast against that buttercup background, but not a whole lot. Not at the moment right now. So we'll come back, of course, and we address the background color, which I'm thinking still is going to be a light blue. This color that we're adding right now will definitely pop out a little bit more. Now, of course, there are some shadows as we're working down, so we're going to add those too. We're just going to take it a little section at a time here. And we'll also add some little bits of information for that candy as well. So I think I'm going to use a light gray here for some of the shadowed areas. And I'm going to let this gray be a little bit of a warmer gray. So we're going to add this warmer gray in the areas of shadow that we see here. And then we're going to knock it back a little bit with the cream color that we just used. So we're going to adjust the value by kind of pushing the values back and forth. And of course, you can use a cool gray too if you want. But it feels like this icing feels more like it should be a warmer gray to me. So you can see how strong those shadows initially are. In some areas we need those shadows to be a little bit strong, like right underneath the cherry here. And then we'll just go back with the off-white color that we're using, and we can tone it back a little bit. Kind of see that when we go back over the top of those grays, they soften up a little bit, feel a little bit more natural. There's also a little bit more warmth in this color here than what I've got initially. So I might add a little bit more of something that's a little bit more yellowish. So in this first little section, I'm kind of feeling out and getting an idea of how I'm going to address the rest of the icing here. So I said I was going to use a little bit more of a warmer color here. We're going to grab this color and add just a little bit more warmth to the icing. So a little bit more of a yellow color. All right, let's go ahead and work down a little bit. We'll go to a couple of these little swirls, and then we'll come back and add some of those little pieces of candy that I'm sure are really delicious. Although it's been a while since I've had a cupcake, personally. I've switched over to being gluten-free for the most part. Every once in a while, I'll have a little bit of food with gluten in it because I just can't resist. And then I'm not very happy with myself afterward. But I love cupcakes and donuts. And I love drawing cupcakes and donuts too. Now I am allowing the palm of my hand to touch the surface of the paper right now. The pastel matte paper does a pretty good job of holding the pastel material in place, as you can see, but we don't really want the palm of our hand to be doing much smearing here, so I'm being very careful. So again, once we've got our base color in place, we can go back with this darker warm gray, kind of define a shape for the shadow. And again, if it's a little too strong, that's okay, because we can tone it down a little bit. It's a little bit darker right along the face of that. I don't know what to call that area. What you would call that, but the face of the icing, as it makes these little valleys and peaks. And then of course we can go back with our base color and tone that down a little bit. Allow some mixing to happen, and there are some like little imperfections and things, little holes and things, so we'll add those too. Maybe with a little bit of a lighter gray. Still warmer, just a little bit lighter. Not much lighter, but just a little bit. And what's interesting is it gets lighter down here at the bottom of this, like in this valley. You would think it would get darker, but it actually gets a little bit lighter down there. And I do blow the pastel dust away. I know that not everyone likes to do that. Some people cringe when I do that, but that's just the way I operate. That's the easiest way to get that material off of the surface. And when you're drawing with really any medium, don't forget that drawing is a process of observation. So we're constantly observing the subject, and we're just looking, instead of thinking about drawing a cupcake, although it's hard not to think about that, but instead of thinking about drawing a cupcake, we need to instead be thinking about the relationships of shapes and values and colors that we see. And then our cupcake should appear, as long as we're, mimicking what we see for the most part on the drawing surface. Now, there are some areas where we've got some stronger highlights, so I'm going to use a little bit of white here, right along the top edge of this little peak. I'll add a little bit of that on this face, the face of the peak, the face of the edge of the frosting that faces one of the light sources there. And actually, I think we might, I've got these warm grays that I'm using here. I feel like maybe we could use a little bit of maybe a cooler blue in some of these areas. I'm not sure. We might add a little bit of a bluer color in some of these areas. We might not. I kind of think that the warmer gray makes a little bit more sense. So we'll just stick with the warmer gray for right now. But you could use any color that you want in the shadows, as long as it's a darker value, of course. And we can, of course, change the value. We can change the color to whatever we want when we're creating an image like this. It doesn't have to be the actual. If we're going for something realistic, it probably needs to be. But really, value is really the most important element of art. All right, I'm going to make some of these shadows underneath the cherry a little bit darker here. This is a really dark gray. We won't go too far with that. So not a black here, although it may look like a black. It's actually a dark gray. And then of course we can always go back and manipulate the intensity of the colors that we add with our base color for each section. All right, speaking of base color, let's go ahead and move down to the next section here. And we've got a little bit, we'll come back and add those little candies in just a minute. And see, it's the contrast and value that's going to make this cupcake feel three-dimensional. Don't have to get wrapped up in all of the little details. Instead, we can just think about the relationships of darks and lights. Now, I'm taking this drawing a section at a time, obviously. Not everyone likes to work that way, and that's fine. We all like to work different ways. So if you like to kind of boldly block in areas of color, that's definitely one approach that you can take. And then go back and develop the details. There's nothing wrong with that. We'll go ahead and work a little bit down into the next section here too. Now, one thing that I can do here to create contrast between the paper wrapper and the icing on the cupcake is to create cooler grays on the wrapper compared to warmer grays on the icing of the cupcake. And that's probably what we'll do here. But first, let's go ahead and get some of these areas have a little bit, get a little bit more value in place in these areas. I'll give my pencil a quick sharpen here. All right, so we can see that we have this dark shadow at the bottom, and then it makes a slow transition or gradates to a lighter value at the top. And if we were drawing this as a line drawing, we would draw lines where we have a dark value but up next to a light value. But since we're working basically with just shapes of color and value, we aren't drawing those lines. We drew those lines with our contoured line drawing, but now we're just focusing on creating contrast in darks and lights. And focusing on the shapes of dark and light. Alright, then of course, once we've got the initial areas of darker value, we can go back and tone it down and allow for some mixing and some transition of color. Pastels give us a lot of control over this. They really make the process go pretty quick compared to other mediums. if we were using colored pencils, for example, we wouldn't be able to approach the subject in this way. We'd have to work a little bit slower and think about the colors that we're adding a little bit more. But with pastels, it gives us the opportunity to manipulate what we've got on the surface, almost like oil paints. Alright, we'll add a little bit of warmth, just like we've done in the other sections with this warmer but subtle off-white here. A little subtle difference there. It's amazing how just a little subtle difference in color makes a big difference. Let's make this little corner down here a little bit darker. And then, of course, we can soften it up again. And a few indications of some subtle imperfections here. Make sure those shadows stay nice and warm here. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. Just keep that in the back of your mind. A little bit of imperfection in your drawings and paintings, I think, makes a big difference into adding interest. Course. All right, now with the white pastel pencil, let's go ahead and make that edge a little bit lighter. All right, before we go too far down, let's go ahead and add some of those pieces of candy there. I'm going to grab a few colors to do so. All right, let's add a few of these candies here. And start here with the pink. Let's make a little shape back here. And just like we did with the frosting, or the... I guess it would be frosting. We're going to just make these little shapes initially, and then we're going to adjust the value here. So I'm going to add some that might not even be there, just to add a little bit more interest. And let's go ahead and add this blue one here. So just putting shapes of color down initially. And then, of course, we can go back and adjust. We got a blue one down here too, don't we? And we've got a purple little star over here. And we've got some white ones too, don't we? So I'm going to use the pastel stick for this so it stands out a little bit more. Got a purple piece right under here, don't we? There's some light pink pieces too. See if this peach does a good color, because it does a good job with those. Looks pretty good. Then of course I'm going to keep all these colors out, so when we get to some of the pieces over here, we know what we need to do with them. Alright, so now we're going to adjust the values. I'm going to use a dark gray. And now that we're getting into this cupcake, I feel like I've done this cupcake with colored pencils before. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have or not. You can see here that pencil went a little bit below where I wanted it to go, so we can just clean it up with our base color. And of course, these guys have a little bit of shadow associated with them too. So make sure we get a little bit of cast shadow. A little bit of coarse shadow on them too. And these guys that are right underneath the cherry are pretty dark down there. And then we'll add a little bit of highlight on these guys too. And just do that with white. Don't need to overthink it or overdo it. And we can go back with our base colors again and soften up those shadows. Now, of course, you can add way more candies than are there, and I see that there's a couple that I've missed. So let's go ahead and add those. Actually, there's quite a few I missed. There's this big white one right here. A couple of white ones. And some yellow ones too. So I'm going to use a pastel stick for these. So that yellow really stands out. There we go. And again, just a hint of shadow. And some highlight. And a little bit of cast shadow underneath some of these guys, especially the larger ones. Make them feel a little bit more grounded in the frosting. All right, now I can bring out a few of the highlights here on these ridges with a stick pastel. I've been using the pencil, but I think the stick pastel is going to make these highlights a little bit stronger. So just make a few marks here before we continue working our way down the cupcake. I think actually before we go much further, we're going to go ahead and address some of the paper too. So add a few more bits of these stronger highlights here. Yeah, maybe we got a little bit too intense with those, so we can just take our base color and kind of knock them down a little bit. All right, let's put a little bit of information here on the paper, and then we'll get back into the icing here and continue working our way down. Let's start with a light gray. Now, this is a cooler gray that I'm going to be using here, and that is so that we can create some contrast. So we don't want the paper and the icing to kind of mix together, although they kind of do a little bit in the reference. This is a little bit of a darker area than the cream, but we can use a cooler gray here, and that will kind of create some more contrast, additional contrast. We've got some contrast in value, but we can use some contrast in color temperature as well. And of course, our background's going to be a lighter blue, so we'll need to keep that in mind as well. We don't want the wrapper to fade into the background. All right, let's use some grays and add a little bit of variety and value here. Of course, I'm going to use a darker gray, but this is still a little bit of a cooler gray here too. So again, the grays that we have in the reference are really more warmer grays, but we're doing this so that we can have some contrast. And there really isn't a whole lot of detail in this wrapper, at least in this area. So we don't have to get carried away with, developing a lot of detail, because there's not a lot of detail there. All right, so that's definitely given us some contrast between the wrapper and the cupcake. A little bit of white now just to add a little bit of some variety here. All right, let's go back down in here and continue developing the icing. Of course, the most important part of the cupcake, most would argue. Now, this little section comes across, and there's actually a little bit of an edge that happens. And it comes back across like this, and then we have a highlight right above it. But right underneath, we have this shadow. So we'll go ahead with our lighter, well, middle gray here. It's warmer. And I'm trying to think about the cross contours here when I'm adding this. So flowing both horizontally and vertically over this little section here, but then it gets lighter again right over here on the right side. So a little bit of cross hatching there. And there's a little bit of shadow, just a touch of shadow on the top edge. All right, and then of course we can go back with our base color and soften that up a little bit. We have so much wonderful control over the values that we create because we can just keep adding to build up the value, to build up the depth in the value, I should say. So we can add lighter values on top or darker values to make the adjustments that we need. All right, let's add a little bit of warmth. And what happens when we add some of this warmth is it makes these shadowy grays that we've used here that are warmer feel actually a little bit cooler, which is kind of interesting. And of course we've got a little white piece of candy over here. Although it doesn't really stand out very much. Maybe we should put a blue in there. Let's put a blue one. I like the blue. Pops of blue, and it's gonna make our background feel a little bit more harmonized anyway. A little bit of shadow under this guy. I'm gonna touch a highlight. And then let's make those highlight edges a little bit stronger here with the stick pastel. We can let that be a little bit more textury. So not necessarily smoothed into the surface, not blended in. Have a little bit more of a textural mark. And that's going to make that raise up a little bit from the surface. And there we go. All right, let's keep working down. Again, we'll start with our base application, our base color. Looks like lots of interesting things happen over here on this right side. Go ahead and put some of this color down here, and then we'll make adjustments with different values. We'll go ahead and fill in the rest of this area with this base color. I think we kind of have an idea of what we're going to be doing our process here. So kind of skip ahead a little bit. Go ahead and get our base color in place, and then we can just manipulate the values for the whole section at one time. We can already see up here at the top where the bottom edge of the cherry is defined by how we're handling the bottom part of the cherry. And it gives us a little bit of a clue as to how our edges are going to behave on the top edge of the cherry. So again, if that area right there where that pastel is blown off is driving you crazy, don't let it drive you crazy, because we're going to come back and fix that at the end. That'll be one of the last stages. All right, now let's go back with our gray. Let's see, we got a few grays that we're using here. I need to give this gray a quick sharpen. Now we can see right underneath this little area we've got pretty dark shadow. In fact, it's one of the darkest shadows that we have in the icing. So we can be a little bit more liberal with our dark gray here. But then immediately it gets light again, where, of course, light is hitting that area that sticks out. Of course, that's very important in creating the illusion of form. And we got this little interesting area where the icing has a recess, a little cavernous area here. And those little bits of candy, we'll add those over the top of these darker areas. So we can right now just concentrate on the shadow. And again, I'll remind you, it doesn't have to be exactly like the reference. Here's another little hole in the icing. And another little hole there. So if yours is a little bit different, that's fine, especially in these little areas where we've got these folds in the icing that kind of just fold right over the top of themselves. Doesn't have to be exactly like the reference. No one, in most cases, no one's going to see your reference photo. And it's not about how well you copy a photo anyway. We've got plenty of things that make copies pretty good. We don't need, people don't have to do that anymore. So so we can add some character and life to our own drawing. You can get a little creative with it if we want. And I think that always leads to a more interesting drawing or painting. We're going to go ahead and add these bits of shadow, these shapes of shadow here. And then we'll come back and we're just going to handle all of these little sections like we have before, but we're just going to handle them all at the same time. So we'll add some warmth, we'll go back with our base color and soften these shadows. All right, let's soften these up a little bit, again with our base color. We'll start with these little holes here. They definitely need to be softened up. This cavernous area here. So remember, once this is softened up, we can go back and make the shadows darker if we need to. We can make the lighter values lighter if we need to. All because we have so much control with pastel pencils and pastels. And keep working them back and forth. That's one of the reasons why I love them so much. Another reason is you get a painterly look. You get a look that resembles a painting, but you don't have to spend time mixing colors. And then making sure you have the right amount of medium on your brush or the right amount of solvent, depending on what medium you're using. We'll need to make this shadow a little bit darker. You get kind of an immediate feedback with pastels. I'm sure you probably noticed there's some details that I'm leaving out with my drawing that are there in the reference, and that's okay. Now, even though we're starting and finishing this drawing in one setting, I still am being patient and taking my time, not trying to rush anything. You could, of course, bring this drawing to a level of very high realism if you wanted to. Work a little bit slower, just concentrate on some of the smaller shapes that we're kind of just generalizing. Also, a little trick, if you want your drawings to look more realistic, then you might consider making larger drawings. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is 8 inches tall by 7 inches wide, so it's not huge. It's not tiny either. It's big enough for us to get the details that we want in this image without spending an eternity on it, of course. All right, let's make some of these shadows a little bit darker before we add the warmth. So again, this is our warm gray that we've been using. Again, just a minute ago I said this is the darkest, one of the darkest areas. And this is pretty dark right underneath here too. So now you might be wondering why I'm not using black here. It's because black is such a strong color. We actually seldomly see true black in reality. We usually see dark grays or dark versions of colors, dark values of colors. So that's what we should be including in our drawings and paintings, dark versions of colors instead of adding blacks. Blacks can make an image look flat. Now we've used a little bit of black at the top there in the cherry, but that was softened up with more applications of the red. So while you can certainly use black, it's probably a good idea to soften it down if you do. Alright, we've got a super dark gray here. We used this right underneath the cherry. We're going to use it again right here. Just make that edge just a little bit darker right there. Make that crease stand out a little bit more. Do that right along the edge here too. Maybe a little bit darker right in that cavernous area. And right underneath the cherry here too at the top. And again, I haven't forgot about the candies up there. We're gonna add those in just a minute. I'm making the contrast a little bit stronger up here at the top, so the darker values are a little bit darker. So there's a little bit more pop up there. A little bit more pop in contrast. Alright, let's add our warmth here. I'm gonna find the pencil for that. Then we'll add our light values and our candies, and we'll be ready to move on to the bottom, the wrapper. Which the wrapper might look complicated, but I don't think it's going to be as complicated as it may seem. And boy, I can't wait. I just can't wait to get that blue in the background, because that's going to make the world of difference. It's going to make this really pop and stand out and feel like a finished drawing. We don't have a lot of contrast in color right now because the colors on the cupcake are so similar to the colors of the background right now, the color of the paper. Alright, let's add some of our highlights here, just like we did right above. And it looks like it gets pretty strong right on the edge here. Again, this doesn't have to be a really polished line here, or really polished mark. We can let those be a little bit looser. We can polish them up a little bit with a pastel pencil. So after you make your marks, we can adjust them to a certain degree with a pastel pencil. But these little highlights that kind of go right up the edge of each one of these folds in the frosting is really kind of important. And a little bit of an impression of the texture there. All right, let's add some of these candies. We've got our colors isolated already. So I'm just going to grab those and make a few of these guys. Again, we'll just start with a basic shape. And then we'll develop the value. I love the pink ones. The pink ones are my favorite here. You can see we can put these marks right over the top of the pastel material that we've already got in place. And we've got some of those light pink ones there too. I think we use this peach for that. It doesn't seem like adding those bits of shadow would make a big difference on these pieces of candy, but it makes a huge difference. Because some of these guys are in shadow, of course. Before I get too carried away, let's... Yeah, there's a white one up here. And another one right here. White ones are hard to see, aren't they? Just a little bit of shadow makes a big difference, making these pieces of candy feel three-dimensional. And then of course a bit of highlight too helps. Since these guys are shiny, don't have to get too wrapped up in these guys, but they definitely add some interest to the cupcake, and probably some deliciousness as well. All right, let's get this little piece of I guess that would be the cake part. I'm going to start here with a color that's almost the same color as the paper. So it might be hard to tell that I've added anything here. And then we're going to use warm grays here to adjust the value. You can see the shadow right along the edge needs to be a little bit darker. We'll leave that pink candy out of this. There's a little piece of pink candy that got down there. We'll let it stay out of the cake area in our drawing. And that's probably going to be enough for down there. Let's go ahead and continue working on the paper. Now, the paper is interesting because we've got some browns and things that happen at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and take this cool gray, just let it come down. And we'll go ahead and just outline all of the wrapper areas with the cool gray. Or not, I shouldn't say outline. We're going to fill in the color. And we're going to let it come down, and it's going to transition to those browns and things. So We'll just bring the color down about halfway. And speaking of browns, we will pull in a little bit of dark brown here. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of that into the cake area. There we go. And we'll have a little bit of that here too. Now we're going to have a transition that happens here between these cooler grays that we're adding and the warmer browns and yellow browns that happen as we can see through the wrapper. You can make this wrapper any color that you want, really. Doesn't have to be this cool gray that we're making it. Again, that is done so that we have enough contrast between the wrapper and the cupcake. And speaking of contrast, I'm going to create a little bit of extra contrast with this dark gray here. That might be a little bit too much in areas, but we can tone it back. Let's go ahead and go all the way across. And of course, some bits of dark brown here and there. And now that we're getting some color down here on the bottom part of the wrapper, we're seeing the contrast, and the cupcake, the color and the value of the cupcake is starting to make a little bit more sense. Value is all about contrast. So once we start getting some contrast, we get a better idea of what we've got in place on the surface. And also areas where we need to adjust. All right, let's take this dark brown and start creating a little bit of that transition here. It goes back into a dark brown at the bottom. You can see you can kind of keep this a little bit loose. You don't have to copy it exactly. And again, I've said this a few times, but allowing yourself as an artist to put your own personal stamp on the drawing, I think, is really important. Instead of just trying to replicate exactly what you see. All right, things turn a little bit yellowish towards the middle. So we're going to use a little bit more of a yellowish brown in this area, and that might be, that's a little dark. So we'll lighten that up, but we'll just get some base color in place. You can see how loose the colors are at this point. And you also see how once we go over the top with kind of a blending color, I'm calling it a blending color because we're going to be using it to do some blending. You'll see how all this kind of smooths out and makes a little bit more sense in just a minute. All right, let's add a little bit of shadow to some of these wrapper pieces. So a little bit of a dark, cooler gray. Before we start blending all of this together, each time we add a color, there's some blending that's happening. Our wrapper is starting to make a little bit more sense. What matters is what we communicate to the viewer. That's all that matters. Not how much we replicate the reference image. All right, so we're going to use a little bit of our base color that we used on the frosting, actually, to kind of smooth the transition. So you can kind of see it gets a little bit lighter there in the middle. So we use this color to kind of smooth that transition. Then we can go back and make some of these areas a little bit darker, but you can see how that's smoothing out what we've got and making it feel a little bit more like transparent paper. All right, let's go back with our light gray and accent some of these edges. Actually, that's the dark gray. All right, now we'll use our light gray to make those edges a little bit more defined here. All right, now for a little bit of contrast with our dark gray that we've used throughout this, bring out some of those. We'll make some of these darker shadows right underneath the cupcake a little bit stronger. Maybe a little bit stronger than they actually are, just to create a little bit more contrast and value. And then at the bottom, you can make the bottom edge a little bit darker, make that just feel a little bit more grounded. That, of course, is mixing. This dark gray is mixing with the dark brown as we go. Hopefully you can see how that little bit of contrast, that little bit of deepening of the value makes a big difference in making our drawing pop a little bit more. And then of course we go too far, we can always tone it back a little bit. Alright, let's use the white and just hit a couple of these edges up here. Mainly the edges of the paper, and also where the paper kind of juts out into space. And I think we're ready now to address the background. So I'm going to go with a light blue for the background. We're going to see if it's going to create enough ample contrast or not, because the values are not that different with this initial color that I've got picked out. So we'll see how this goes. We're going to go ahead and start down here, and we might have to define the edges of the wrapper a little bit more. That's really what I'm concerned about losing, is the wrapper. I know that the cupcake's going to stand out here, so I'm going to go right along the edges here with the pastel, and I'm not going to worry about the shadow yet. We'll come back and add the shadow, which of course would be a darker version of this blue, but for right now we're just going to kind of frame the edges with a solid color. And we'll evaluate how this is going to look, of course. If we need to make the blue a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, we can do that. And this of course is when we're going to get rid of all that dust up there at the top. That's probably driven some of you folks a little bit crazy. I think we're going to be okay with this blue for our background color. Now you can make this a solid application if you want, which is what I'm going to do here. Or you can kind of have broken color in the background where you let some of the paper show through, some of the color of the paper show through. It's completely up to you. Allowing some of the paper to show through is going to give this drawing a little bit more energy, while kind of smoothing out the application is going to make it feel a little bit more representational. So as you can probably see, we've got two issues now. First of all, our cupcake is miraculously floating there in space. We're gonna have to pull it back down to Earth here. So we're gonna add a shadow underneath it. But you can see over here, we are losing a little bit of the edge of the cupcake. So I don't usually recommend outlining, and that's not necessarily what we're doing here, but we're going to add a little bit more contrast out here to the edge so that we can see the edges of the cupcake wrapper a little bit clearer. And these values probably could stand to be a little darker anyway. So we're going to use a gray out here. You might notice that I'm using the warmer gray here. We're going to have enough contrast between the edge of the icing and the wrapper, but we need to make sure that the wrapper stands out against the background too. All right, and then we can, of course, soften that up here with our base color again. I feel like that makes a little bit more sense there. And right along the edge here, we've got this connection between the wrapper and the frosting. We'll just put a little bit of a stronger edge there. There we go. All right, now the last problem we have is that our cupcake is floating. So we're going to use some darker blues here to create some shadow. Alright, so we're going to start with this darker blue here. And this might not be dark enough. Let's see. Yeah, this blue is a little bit better for our outer shadow. So we'll work on the outer shadow here where we've got kind of a subtle shadow happening there. So remember we have two light sources here. Let's see how that's reading. Oh yeah, that's nice. So we'll use a soft application here. Again, using the pencil mainly by holding it at the end of the shaft. Now, if you want to smooth this out a little bit, you can just take your finger and do a quick little blend there. It gives us a nice subtle shadow there. And on the other side, we have kind of the same thing. We have a subtle shadow on both sides, and then we have a stronger shadow right in this area, which we'll add next. Alright, let's see if this blue is going to work for us. If it's going to be too strong. I think it might work for us. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of that color down. See if it's too blue. If it is too blue, we can tone it back a little bit. Actually take the intensity out of it a little bit with a bit of gray if we need to. We'll give that a soft little blend, and we'll do the same thing here. I actually think that shadow's kind of nice. We'll probably just leave the blue as intense as it is. But we will add a little bit of a stronger edge along the bottom. And to do this, we'll use our dark gray, dark cool gray. And we're just going to kind of enhance the edge. And of course, this is going to make our cupcake feel a little bit more grounded. It feels stuck to the ground. So we no longer have a floating cupcake, which of course is something that, well, I was going to say that nobody wants, but I think it would be kind of cool to have some floating cupcakes every once in a while. I'm going to just lightly enhance some of the edges here of the wrapper. Make that feel a little bit more three-dimensional. And I think we can call this cupcake drawing complete. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you worked alongside me and created something that you're proud of course. And don't forget, if you like this type of video, if you like this type of content, give it a like and give me a comment below this video letting me know that you do like this kind of thing. Of course, I work in so many different mediums that I would love to continue to do this here and post these videos on YouTube. So if you like it, let me know. And don't forget about the membership program. Again, there's a link in the description below if you want to go a lot deeper with your drawing and painting skills and learn a lot more, of course. Thanks again for watching the video, and as always, I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.